Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ashwood, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Lost hikers, bear attacks, flash floods, rock slides, minute, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in Bone Hollow that October. I became a ranger after spending 15 years underground in the coal mines. After a cave-in nearly killed me and 3 other men back in '45, I swore I'd never work in the dark again. The mountains gave me what I needed. Open sky, fresh air, and the kind of peace you can only find when you're standing on a ridge watching the sun come up over the Smokies. My wife passed 5 years ago, and my daughter Margaret is away at boarding school in Knoxville. It's just me and these mountains now, and that suits me fine. I know every trail, every creek, every hollow between Cataract Falls and Thunderhead Mountain, or at least, I thought I did. The call came in around 3 in the afternoon on October 28, 1962. I was cleaning my gear at the ranger station when the radio crackled to life. "Tom, we got a family that didn't check back in," said Betty, our dispatcher. "The Brennans, parents and 2 kids. They signed the trail register this morning for a day hike into Bone Hollow. Should have been back by noon." I looked at my watch. 3:15. In October, the sun starts setting early, and the temperature can drop 20 degrees once it goes down. Even experienced hikers can get turned around in that maze of ridges and hollows. "Copy that, Betty. What's their experience level?" "Dad said they've hiked before, but they're from Florida, not familiar with our terrain." I grabbed my pack and checked my gear. First aid kit, rope, emergency blanket, flares, and my radio. The Motorola handheld was new that year, supposed to work anywhere in the park, though we'd been having trouble with dead zones. "I'll head out now," I radioed back. "Send backup to meet me at the Bone Hollow trailhead in 2 hours if I don't check in." Bone Hollow isn't one of our popular trails. Most visitors stick to Cataract Falls or the main ridge trails with the scenic overlooks. Bone Hollow is what we call a locals-only trail, narrow, steep, and not much to see except old-growth hemlocks and a small creek. The hollow got its name from all the deer bones hunters used to find there, though I'd noticed in recent years that wildlife seemed to avoid the area altogether. I drove the service road as far as I could, then hiked the last mile to the trailhead. The trail register showed the Brennan family had signed in at 8:30 a.m. Jim and Carol Brennan, plus their kids Tommy, age 12, and Sarah, age 9. Under expected return time, Jim had written 2 p.m. It was now 4 o'clock, and there was no sign they'd returned. I talked to the only other hikers in the area, an elderly couple from North Carolina who were just finishing their hike. They remembered seeing the Brennans around noon. "Nice family," the woman said. The little girl was excited about seeing a waterfall. They were heading down into that narrow valley. She pointed toward Bone Hollow. "You see them come back out?" I asked. "No, but we took the ridge trail back. Wouldn't have seen them anyway." I thanked them and checked the trail register again. According to the book, the Brennans were the only people who'd entered Bone Hollow all week. That struck me as odd. October is usually busy with leaf peepers, and Bone Hollow, while not scenic, connects to some prettier areas. The trail into Bone Hollow starts easy enough, a gentle slope through mixed hardwoods. But after the first quarter mile, it drops steep and fast into the valley. The trees change too, from oak and maple to ancient hemlocks that block out most of the sky. Some of those trees are over 400 years old, standing there, since before the first Europeans set foot in these mountains. I'd been down this trail dozens of times over the years, usually chasing lost hikers or checking for storm damage. It had always been quiet, but today felt different. As I descended into the hollow, I realized what was bothering me. There were no sounds at all. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and my own breathing. In 17 years of working these mountains, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Right now, they were telling me something was wrong. But a family was missing, and finding them was my job. Whether I liked the feel of the place or not, the trail got steeper, and the silence got deeper. I checked my radio, but all I got was static. We'd had trouble with reception in some of the deeper hollows, but my radio had always worked here before. I kept hiking down, watching for any sign of the Brennan family. About a mile in, I found something that made me stop cold. Hanging from a hemlock branch about 12 feet off the ground was a small backpack, a kid, bright blue, with cartoon characters on it. A kid's pack. There was no way a 9-year-old girl could have gotten that pack up there on her own. I stared up at that little blue backpack for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The branch it hung from was thick and strong, but way too high for anyone to reach without climbing gear. And I couldn't see any scuff marks on the tree bark that would suggest someone had climbed up there. I found a long stick and managed to knock the pack down. When it hit the ground, I could see it belonged to Sarah Brennan, and I think her name was written on a tag in careful 9-year-old handwriting. Inside were the usual things a kid takes on a hike: candy bars, a juice box, a small stuffed bear, and a disposable camera. What bothered me was how the pack's contents were arranged on the ground. Someone had placed them in a perfect circle around the base of the tree. The candy bars, juice box, camera, and little bear were spaced exactly the same distance apart, like someone had used a ruler. No kid does that. Hell, no adult does that either, not unless they're trying to send some kind of message. I gathered everything up and put it back in the pack, then continued down the trail. My radio crackled with static every few minutes, but I couldn't make out any voices. The silence in the hollow was getting to me. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never been anywhere so completely quiet. Even in winter, you usually hear wind in the trees or water running somewhere. Here, the air was perfectly still. About a quarter mile further down, I found the second backpack. This one was larger, an adult hiking pack in forest green. It was hanging from another hemlock, this one at exactly the same height as Sarah's pack. The contents were arranged in the same perfect circle on the ground below. This pack belonged to Carol Brennan, according to the ID tag. Inside were trail mix, water bottles, a first aid kit, and a camera. Again, everything had been laid out in that strange circular pattern. I was starting to feel a cold knot in my stomach. In 17 years of search and rescue, I'd seen plenty of strange things. People do weird stuff when they panic or get hypothermic. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. I tried my radio again. This time, instead of static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Help us, mister. We're lost." It was a child's voice, a little girl, scared and crying. It had to be Sarah Brennan. "Sarah? Sarah, this is Ranger Ashwood. Where are you?" "Down here. We can't find the trail." The voice seemed to be coming from deeper in the hollow, past where the trail curved around a massive boulder. I shouldered both backpacks and picked up my pace. "Keep talking, Sarah. I'm coming to find you." But there was no answer. Just that deep, unnatural silence closing in around me again. The trail curved left around the boulder, and I could see it continued down toward the creek at the bottom of the hollow. The fog was getting thicker as I descended, which was strange because the sky had been clear when I started. In the mountains, fog usually means a weather change, but my radio would have warned me about any incoming fronts. "Sarah, Tommy, can you hear me?" My voice echoed off the steep sides of the hollow. But the echo sounded wrong somehow. Instead of the usual quick bounce you get in these narrow valleys, my voice seemed to hang in the air for too long, like the mountains were holding on to it. That's when I heard the whistling. It was faint at first, just a few notes drifting through the fog. It sounded like someone whistling a tune while they worked. The kind of absent-minded melody you might hear from a farmer in his field or a mechanic under the hood of a car. But we were in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest road. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The whistling stopped. I waited, listening, but all I heard was my own heartbeat. Then, just as I was about to move on, the whistling started again. This time I recognized the tune, Dixie, the old Confederate song. My grandfather used to whistle it when I was a kid, said it reminded him of his father who fought in the war. The whistling was coming from ahead of me, somewhere near the creek. I followed the trail down, and that's when I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There were footprints in the mud beside the trail, small ones that could have been made by children. But they weren't heading down the trail like mine were. They were heading straight into the thickest part of the rhododendron thicket, where there was no trail at all. I pushed through the dense bushes, following the prints. The whistling got louder as I went deeper into the thicket. It was definitely Dixie, but played with a slow, mournful quality that made it sound more like a funeral dirge than a marching song. After about 50 yards of fighting through the undergrowth, I broke through into a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center of the clearing was a pile of rocks arranged in a rough circle, like an old campfire ring. Inside the circle were 4 pairs of hiking boots, arranged in a neat line. They were still warm. I knelt down and checked the boots. 2 adult pairs, 2 children's. The Brennan family had been here recently, maybe just minutes ago, but where were they now? The whistling had stopped again, but now I could hear something else. Footsteps, moving through the forest with a slow, measured pace. They seemed to be circling the clearing, staying just out of sight in the thick undergrowth. Jim? Carol? This is Park Ranger Ashwood. If you can hear me, please respond. The footsteps stopped. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard Jim Brennan's voice. Over here, Ranger. We're over here. I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just empty forest and deepening fog. Jim, where are you? Follow the whistling, came the reply. But this time the voice seemed to be coming from a different direction entirely. Just follow the whistling, and you'll find us. That's when the whistling started again. But now it wasn't just one person. It sounded like a whole group of people, all whistling Dixie in perfect harmony. The sound was coming from all around me, echoing off the trees and rocks until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. And that's when I realized something that made my hands start shaking. I'd heard that voice on my radio before, when Sarah had called for help, but Jim Brennan's voice sounded exactly the same. No emotion, no panic, just that flat, hollow tone that didn't sound quite human. The whistling grew louder, and I could swear I heard marching feet, keeping time with the music. But I was alone in the clearing with nothing but 4 pairs of empty boots, and a growing certainty that whatever had happened to the Brennan family, they weren't just lost, they were something else entirely now. I backed away from those empty boots, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whistling surrounded me now, coming from every direction at once. It wasn't wind through the trees. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times before. This was human whistling, precise and deliberate, like a military unit keeping time. The fog was getting thicker, rolling in between the trees like something alive. It moved wrong, flowing uphill against what little breeze there was. In the distance, I could see shapes moving through the mist, tall figures walking in formation. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Ashwood. I need backup at Bone Hollow immediately. Something's not right here. Static answered me. Then my own voice came crackling back through the speaker. Ashwood to base. False alarm. Everything's fine. Do not send backup. I stared at the radio in my hand. I hadn't said those words. The shapes in the fog were getting closer. Through the mist, I could make out the silhouettes of men in what looked like old military uniforms. They moved with the rigid precision of soldiers, their boots hitting the ground in perfect unison. And they were all whistling that same mournful version of Dixie. I knew I should run, but something kept me rooted to the spot. There was something familiar about one of the figures, a smaller shape walking among the soldiers. As they got closer, I could see it was a little girl in a hiking outfit. Sarah Brennan. She walked with the same mechanical precision as the others, her eyes staring straight ahead. She was whistling too, that same haunting melody, though her lips barely moved. Sarah, I called out. Sarah, it's Ranger Ashwood. She didn't respond, didn't even look in my direction. She just kept walking with that ghostly parade, her small voice joining the chorus of whistles that echoed through the hollow. Behind her came the others, Jim and Carol Brennan and their son Tommy, but they weren't the same family I'd seen described in the missing persons report. Their clothes hung in tatters, and their skin had a pale, translucent quality like moonlight on water. They marched in perfect step with the soldiers around them, their faces empty of any emotion. And the soldiers, God help me, the soldiers were wrong in every way possible. Their uniforms were faded and torn, stained with something dark that could have been mud or blood. Some wore Union blue, others Confederate gray, but they marched together like old enemies who'd found common cause in death. I could see through them. The trees and rocks behind them were visible through their bodies, like looking through dirty glass. But their feet left real footprints in the mud, and their whistling filled the air with sound that seemed to press against my eardrums. The column of phantoms marched past me as if I didn't exist. I counted at least 20 of them, maybe more. It was hard to tell in the fog. They moved with purpose, like they were heading somewhere important, and the Brennan family was now part of their ranks. As the last of them disappeared into the mist, I heard a voice behind me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I spun around to find a man in a Union officer's uniform, standing just outside the circle of rocks. Unlike the others, he seemed solid, real. His uniform was clean and pressed, his brass buttons polished to a bright shine, but his eyes were the color of winter fog. "The music, he continued, his voice cultured and educated. "There's something about Dixie that captures the soul, don't you think? Even when you're not from the South." I fumbled for the service pistol on my belt, but my hands were shaking too badly to draw it properly. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Colonel Marcus Henley, late of the 15th Ohio Infantry." He touched the brim of his cap in a polite salute. "I've been recruiting in these mountains for quite some time now. Your national park has made it somewhat more difficult. All these visitors trampling through our territory. But we make do." "Recruiting for what?" "The Eternal Patrol, Ranger Ashwood. Someone has to guard these mountains, keep watch over the old battlefields. The living don't understand the importance of such work. But the dead, we comprehend duty." The fog swirled around us, and I could see more shapes moving in the distance. Not just soldiers now, but other figures. Men in ranger uniforms like mine, hikers in modern gear, even what looked like Cherokee warriors with painted faces and traditional weapons. "How many?" I whispered. "Oh, we've been recruiting for over a century now. Every few years, we add to our ranks. The Brennan family will make fine additions, the children especially. Young ones adapt so well to military discipline." I thought about Sarah, that sweet little girl who'd been excited about seeing a waterfall. Now she was walking through the forest with the dead, whistling their ghostly songs. "Let them go," I said, finding my voice. "They don't belong here." Colonel Henley smiled, and I could see the forest through his teeth. "They belong to us now, Ranger. Just as you will, soon enough. Listen." I realized I'd been unconsciously tapping my foot to the rhythm of the distant whistling. Worse, I'd started humming along under my breath. The melody was infectious, worming its way into my mind like a parasite. "That's how it starts," the colonel said. "First you listen, then you hum, then you whistle along. Before you know it, you're part of the patrol. It's really quite painless." I bit down hard on my tongue, using the pain to break the musical trance. The taste of blood filled my mouth, but it cleared my head enough to think. "What happened here?" I asked. "What made this place so wrong?" "Death, Ranger. Violent, senseless death. This hollow saw a massacre during the war, Confederate deserters slaughtered by Union troops. But the Union soldiers didn't fare much better. Disease and ambush took most of them before they could leave these mountains. All that anger, all that unfinished business, it soaks into the ground like blood." The whistling was getting louder again. Looking through the fog, I could see the ghostly column returning, making another circuit of the hollow. They moved in an endless loop, like a patrol that never ends. "The Cherokee knew to avoid this place," Colonel Henley continued. "They called it a thin spot, where the world of the living and the world of the dead overlap. But white men were too stubborn to listen to such wisdom." I watched the Brennan family march past again, their faces blank and empty. Sarah's stuffed bear was tucked under her arm, but even that looked faded and ghostly now. "There has to be a way to break this," I said. "Some way to free them." "Oh, there is," the colonel replied. "Someone could take their place. A willing substitute would satisfy the requirements of service. But who would make such a sacrifice for strangers?" He was looking at me expectantly, and I realized this had all been leading to this moment. The strange arrangement of the backpacks, the voices on the radio, even letting me see the ghostly parade. It was all designed to bring me to this choice. Save the family by taking their place, or walk away and let them march with the dead forever. The whistling grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it pulling at my mind, trying to make me step forward and join that endless patrol. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it fast, because with every passing second, the line between the living and the dead was getting thinner. and I was running out of time to choose which side I wanted to be on. The whistling was inside my head now, echoing in my skull like I was standing inside a bell. I could feel it changing me, making my thoughts slower and cloudier. When I looked down at my hands, they seemed paler than before, and I could swear I saw the outline of brass buttons forming on my ranger shirt. "Choose quickly, Ranger Ashwood," Colonel Henley said. "The transformation becomes irreversible at dawn, and sunrise is only hours away." I thought about Margaret, my daughter at boarding school. She'd already lost her mother. If I joined this ghostly patrol, she'd be truly alone in the world. But if I walked away, 4 innocent people would spend eternity marching through these mountains with the dead. The Brennan family passed by again, and this time Sarah turned her head slightly toward me. For just a moment, her empty eyes seemed to plead for help. Then she was gone again, swallowed by the fog. "They're not suffering," Colonel Henley said, as if reading my thoughts. "The dead feel no pain, no fear, no regret. They simply serve." "That's not living," I said. "That's not even existing. And yet, it's eternal. No aging, no sickness, no heartbreak. Just purpose, forever." The ghostly column was making another circuit, and I noticed something I'd missed before. Among the Civil War soldiers were other figures, men in different uniforms from different eras. I saw what looked like a Revolutionary War militiaman, a World War I doughboy, even a man in buckskins who could have been a frontier scout. This hollow had been collecting the dead for a lot longer than just the Civil War. "How far back does this go?" I asked. "The Cherokee were right about this being a thin place," Colonel Henley replied. "It's been drawing the violent dead for centuries. Every war, every conflict that touched these mountains has left its mark here. We are the guardians of that history." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about the Civil War massacre. This hollow was a repository for every violent death in these mountains going back generations. The dead soldiers weren't just patrolling, they were preventing something worse from escaping. "What are you guarding against?" I asked. For the first time, the colonel's composed expression wavered. "There are things older than human conflict in these mountains, Ranger. Things the Cherokee bound with rituals and blood sacrifice. Things that would make our little war seem like a children's game. The patrol keeps them sleeping." The pieces fell into place. The Cherokee had known about this place and avoided it. When white settlers arrived and fought their wars here, the violence had awakened something ancient. The dead soldiers weren't just trapped, they were serving as a supernatural barrier, keeping something even more dangerous contained. And if the patrol fails, then these mountains become uninhabitable for the living, perhaps uninhabitable for anyone. I looked at the ghostly column making its endless rounds. Among them, I could see the Brennan family, their humanity fading more with each circuit. But I also saw the purpose in their march. They were part of something bigger than themselves, even if they no longer understood what that was. My radio crackled to life again, but this time it was a real voice from base. "Ashwood, what's your status? We've got reports of strange sounds coming from Bone Hollow." I looked at the radio, then at Colonel Henley. He nodded slightly. "This is your last chance, Ranger. Join willingly, and I can guarantee the Brennan family will be released. Refuse, and they remain part of the patrol forever." The whistling grew even louder, and I could feel my willpower slipping away. Part of me actually wanted to join them, wanted to lay down the burden of choice and responsibility, and just march forever through these mountains I loved. But then I thought about Margaret again, and about all the other families who might hike into this hollow in years to come. Someone had to warn them. Someone had to remember what really happened here. I pulled my service whistle from my belt, the same kind of whistle the army used for commands. For a moment, I considered raising it to my lips and joining the ghostly chorus. Instead, I threw it to Colonel Henley. "Take this as payment," I said. "Let the family go. I'll find another way to serve." The colonel caught the whistle and examined it with surprise. "Interesting," he said. "A substitute of sorts. This whistle has seen service, hasn't it? Carried by a man who understood duty. It had been my grandfather's whistle from the Spanish-American War. I'd carried it for 17 years, thinking of it as a good luck charm. "Will it work?" I asked. Colonel Henley raised the whistle to his lips and blew a single sharp note. The ghostly column stopped marching and turned toward us with military precision. "Brennan family, step forward," the colonel commanded. Jim, Carol, Tommy, and Sarah broke ranks and walked toward us. As they approached, their ghostly appearance began to fade. Color returned to their skin, and their tattered clothes reformed into the hiking gear they'd been wearing. "You're free to go," Colonel Henley told them. "But remember, you've seen something here that must never be spoken of. The living world has enough fear without learning about ours." The family blinked in confusion, looking around as if waking from a dream. Where are we?" Carol asked. "You got turned around in the fog," I said quickly. "I'm Ranger Ashwood. I'm here to take you back to the trailhead." As I led the Brennan family away from the clearing, I could hear Colonel Henley's whistle echoing through the hollow, calling his soldiers back to their eternal patrol. The fog began to lift, and the normal sounds of the forest slowly returned. But I knew I'd left something of myself in that clearing. The hollow had marked me, changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. And as we climbed back toward the world of the living, I could still hear that haunting whistle echoing in the distance, playing a tune that would stay with me for the rest of my life. We made it back to the trailhead just as the sun was setting. The Brennan family seemed dazed but unharmed, with no memory of anything that had happened after they entered the hollow. As far as they knew, they'd gotten lost in the fog, and I'd found them by the creek. The backup rangers met us at the parking area, and we got the family checked out by the park medic. Aside from mild exposure and dehydration, they were fine physically. I filed my report that night, writing up the incident as a routine lost hiker rescue. Sometimes the truth isn't something you can put in an official document. The next morning, I drove back to Bone Hollow with my supervisor to collect the family's abandoned backpacks. We found them right where I'd left them, hanging from the hemlock branches. But when we took them down, the contents weren't arranged in those strange circles anymore. They were just scattered on the ground, like someone had dumped them out while looking for something. "Probably bears," my supervisor said, examining the torn fabric. "They love getting into packs for the food." I nodded and didn't mention that bears don't hang backpacks 12 feet up in trees. Within a week, the Park Service quietly closed Bone Hollow to public access. The official reason was geological instability and concerns about rock slides. They put up signs and barriers, but didn't make a big deal about it. Sometimes bureaucracy works in mysterious ways. I requested a transfer to the visitor center after that. Told my supervisor I was getting too old for backcountry search and rescue. It was partly true. It was at 43, I wasn't as spry as I used to be. But the real reason was that I could no longer hike the deep hollows without hearing that ghostly whistling in the distance. The sound followed me everywhere now. On quiet nights at home, I'd hear faint strains of Dixie drifting through my windows. During thunderstorms, when the wind howled through the trees, it sounded like marching feet keeping time to some ancient rhythm. I developed an acute sensitivity to places where the past had left its mark. Old battlefields, abandoned cemeteries, houses where violent deaths had occurred. I could feel them from miles away, like a low-grade fever in my bones. The Park Service found my new instincts useful for keeping visitors away from dangerous areas, though they never understood why I suddenly knew so much about places I'd never mentioned before. Margaret came home for Christmas that year, and she noticed the change in me right away. "Dad, you seem different," she said one evening as we sat by the fire. Sadder, somehow. I wanted to tell her everything, about the hollow, the ghostly soldiers, the choice I'd made. But how do you explain to your 16-year-old daughter that you'd traded a piece of your soul to save strangers? How do you tell her that some places in this world are so stained with death that they become prisons for the living? Instead, I just hugged her and said, "Getting older, sweetheart. Mountains change a man over time." That winter, a government team showed up at the park asking questions about unusual incidents. They wore plain clothes and flashed credentials from departments I'd never heard of. They interviewed all the rangers who'd worked the backcountry, asking about missing persons cases, unexplained phenomena, and areas that visitors consistently avoided. When they got to me, I told them about Bone Hollow. Not everything. I left out the ghosts and the supernatural kernel. But I mentioned the acoustic anomalies, the wildlife avoidance patterns, and the way electronic equipment malfunctioned in the deeper parts of the hollow. They listened carefully and took detailed notes. Before they left, the lead investigator handed me a business card with just a phone number on it. "If you ever encounter anything unusual," he said, "anything that doesn't fit normal explanations, give us a call." We have resources for situations that fall outside standard procedures. I kept that card in my wallet for years, though I never used it. Some secrets are too dangerous to share, even with people who claim to understand them. Spring came early that year, and with it came the hikers and tourists. I worked the visitor center, giving trail recommendations and safety briefings. I found myself steering people away from certain areas without really thinking about it. The old Cherokee burial grounds, the sites of Revolutionary War skirmishes, the remote hollows where too many people had gone missing over the years. The Brennan family sent me a Christmas card that December. They'd made it home safely to Florida and wanted to thank me for rescuing them. Sarah had drawn a picture of our mountains on the front, all purple ridges and green forests. It looked peaceful and normal, nothing like the dark hollow where I'd found them walking with the dead. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing just right, I still hear that otherworldly whistling echoing through the mountains. It's a reminder that some places hold on to their past like a drowning man holds on to rope, desperately, dangerously, and forever. I retired from the Park Service in 1978, but I never left these mountains. I still live here, in a small cabin on the outskirts of Gatlinburg, and I still keep watch over places like Bone Hollow. Not as a ranger anymore, but as something else, a guardian of secrets, a keeper of warnings. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Smokies and you hear whistling where there shouldn't be any, trust me, turn around and walk away. Some music isn't meant for the living to hear. And if you ever meet a park ranger who tries to steer you away from certain trails, listen to them. They might know something about those places that isn't in any guidebook. Because these mountains are beautiful, but they're old, and they remember everything that's ever happened in their shadows. Not all of those memories are meant to be disturbed. The dead have their own ways of making sure the living remember that lesson. My name is Rebecca Thornbury, and I've been a ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest for 12 years now. Folks around here know me as the Cave Lady. I'm the one they call when someone gets lost underground or when tourists need rescuing from places they never should have gone. I've pulled more people out of Kentucky's cave systems than I care to count. It was March of 1973, and winter was finally loosening its grip on the mountains. The Red River Gorge area was my beat, miles and miles of limestone caves that twisted through the earth like a giant's fingers. Most people don't realize how dangerous caves can be. They think it's all pretty rock formations and cool tourist spots. They don't know about the flash floods, the toxic gases, or the places where one wrong step sends you falling into darkness so deep your scream never echoes back. I learned respect for caves the hard way. Back in college, I lost my climbing partner Sarah in a cave-in. Found her 3 days later, and it took me another day to dig her out with my bare hands. That's why I became a ranger. Someone needs to keep people safe down there. My cabin sits about 5 miles from the main cave entrance, surrounded by pine trees that whisper secrets when the wind blows through them. I live alone. I've been divorced for 2 years now. Tom said I loved those caves more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. The call came in around sunset on March 15th. Pete Garrison, my backup ranger, knocked on my door with worry lines creasing his weathered face. "Beck, we got a problem," he said, stepping inside and shaking rain off his jacket. "That research team from the university, they're overdue." I poured coffee while he explained. Dr. Morrison and 2 graduate students had been exploring a new passage system in the Mammoth Cave extensions. They'd been down there for 3 days, mapping unexplored chambers. Their last radio contact was 18 hours ago. "What exactly did Morrison say?" I asked. Pete pulled out a crumpled note. Exact words were, "Found something incredible down here. Carved chambers. Definitely not natural. These symbols look older than Cherokee." Then the signal cut out. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The one that meant trouble. Weather's getting bad up there. Storm's supposed to hit tonight. That's what worries me. If those passages flood, I was already reaching for my gear. Cave rescue was serious business, especially with a storm coming. In 12 years, I'd seen what water could do underground. It turns familiar passages into death traps in minutes. My equipment hung on pegs by the door. Carbide headlamp, climbing rope, emergency oxygen, radio beacon. Everything checked and double-checked, because down there, your gear is your life. I grabbed my emergency medical kit and the cave maps Morrison had filed with the office. Any idea where they went? I asked. Morrison marked their route on this. Pete spread out a detailed cave map on my kitchen table. Red ink showed their planned path through the known passages, then a question mark where they'd entered unexplored territory. The Cherokee used to tell stories about those deeper caves. They called them the homes of the Nunahai, the underground people who stole humans and took them to live beneath the earth forever. Old wives' tales, I'd always figured. Ways to keep children from wandering into dangerous places. But looking at that map, with its red line disappearing into blank space, I felt something cold settle in my chest. We'll head down at first light, I decided. Storm should pass by then. Pete nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We both knew that if Morrison's team was trapped by floodwater, 18 hours was already too long. That night, I lay in bed, listening to rain hammer the roof and wind howl through the pines. Somewhere out there, 3 people were lost in absolute darkness, maybe injured, maybe worse. It was my job to bring them home. I'd been in those caves hundreds of times, knew every twist and turn of the mapped sections. Cave monsters were just bats, bears, and overactive imaginations. At least, that's what I told myself. We entered the cave system at dawn. The storm had passed, but water still dripped from the entrance ceiling, and I could hear the distant sound of rushing water deep below. Not good. The underground river was running high. Pete carried the backup radio while I led with my headlamp cutting through darkness thick enough to feel. The first quarter mile followed tourist trails, CO, wide passages with handrails and electric lights. But Morrison's route quickly left the safe areas behind. Jesus, it's cold down here, Pete muttered behind me. He was right. The caves stayed a constant 54 degrees year-round, but this felt different. Colder. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and won't leave. We found Morrison's base camp about 2 hours in. Their equipment was scattered around a small chamber, camping gear, research notebooks, battery packs for their lights. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The coffee pot was still warm. That's impossible, Pete said, touching the metal side. They've been gone 18 hours. I opened Morrison's research notebook. Page after page of careful drawings showed carved symbols cut into cave walls. Strange spirals and angular marks that definitely weren't natural. The handwriting got messier toward the end, more urgent. The final entry made my skin crawl. Found the main chamber, symbols everywhere. Sarah thinks they're warnings. Going deeper, they're calling to us. Who's Sarah? Pete asked, reading over my shoulder. I checked the team roster. Morrison brought 2 graduate students, both men, no Sarah listed anywhere. We followed fresh boot prints deeper into the cave. My headlamp beam danced over limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls and stone icicles hanging from the ceiling. Beautiful and deadly, one wrong step would send you tumbling into a pit so deep we'd never find your body. That's when I noticed the bats were gone. Normally, these caves crawled with wildlife. Bats, blind fish in the underground pools, cave crickets skittering along the walls. But today, nothing. Even the air felt dead, like the cave itself was holding its breath. Beck, Pete's voice was tight, my headlamp's getting dim. I checked my own. The battery gauge showed full charge, but the light was definitely weaker than it should be. Change the battery pack. I put in a fresh one this morning. These things should last 12 hours easy. We kept moving, but something was wrong with the cave itself. Sounds echoed strangely, sometimes arriving before we made them, sometimes not echoing at all. My compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Then we found Morrison's scattered equipment. It was spread across a circular chamber in a perfect spiral pattern. Ropes cut clean through, but the edges were smooth as glass. No knife could make cuts like that. Radio equipment smashed but arranged in neat piles. Morrison's backpack hung from a stalactite 15 feet off the ground. How the hell did that get up there? Pete whispered. That's when we heard the voices. They came from deeper in the cave, echoing up through passages we hadn't explored yet. Men's voices calling for help, sometimes crying out in pain. Morrison and his students, definitely, but the sounds were all wrong. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off walls that shouldn't exist. We're coming, I shouted into the darkness. The voices stopped immediately. Complete silence, so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Pete grabbed my arm. Beck, that last voice. It sounded like my father. Your father's been dead 10 years, Pete. I know what I heard. I did too, because mixed in with Morrison's voice, I'd heard something that made my blood freeze. A woman calling my name in Sarah's voice, the climbing partner I'd lost in college. But that was impossible. Sarah had died in a cave-in 2 states away, 15 years ago. We found Morrison's body in a carved chamber that definitely wasn't on any map. He sat slumped against a wall covered in symbols, his arm reaching toward something in the center of the room. But Morrison looked like he'd been dead for months, not hours. His skin was dried leather stretched over bones, his clothes hanging loose on a body that weighed maybe 60 pounds. Mummified, like he'd aged decades in a single day. Jesus Christ, Pete breathed. What happened to him? I knelt beside the body, fighting down nausea. Morrison's face was frozen in an expression of desperate longing, like he'd died reaching for something he wanted more than life itself. The graduate students were nowhere to be found, but I could still hear their voices calling from deeper in the cave, except now they sounded different, younger, like children lost in the dark. We need to get out of here, Pete said. This isn't natural. None of this is natural. He was right. But those voices were still calling, and I'd taken an oath to protect people in these caves, even if everything in my gut screamed that we should run. You go back, I told him. Get on the radio and call for backup. I'm going after the students. Pete looked at Morrison's mummified corpse, then at me. I'm not leaving you down here alone, but his voice shook when he said it. And in the beam of his failing headlamp, I could see the raw fear in his eyes. We were 3 miles underground, in passages that didn't exist on any map, looking at a dead man who'd aged 50 years in 18 hours. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was calling our names in the voices of people we'd loved and lost. We entered the carved chamber system. An hour later, Pete reluctantly following behind me. His headlamp had died completely, leaving him dependent on my light. But even my lamp was dimming fast, burning through battery packs like they were candles. The symbols covered every surface. Walls, ceiling, even the floor beneath our feet. They seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, shifting and writhing in my peripheral vision. Some looked like Cherokee markings, but others were completely alien. Angular shapes that hurt to look at too long. This place is old, I whispered, running my fingers over the carved stone. Really old, older than the Cherokee, older than anyone we know about. Pete's breathing was getting harsh. The air down here felt thick, like trying to breathe through wet cotton. My oxygen meter showed normal levels, but something was definitely wrong. That's when I saw it in the corner of my vision. A pale figure standing in a passage entrance about 50 feet away. I spun my headlamp toward it, but the light revealed only empty stone. No figure, no movement. But in the brief second I'd glimpsed it, the thing had looked human. Sort of. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung too long. Did you see that? I asked Pete. See what? Never mind. But my hands were shaking as I checked our route on the map. According to the blueprints, we were standing in solid rock. This chamber system shouldn't exist. We found evidence of other cavers as we went deeper. Old evidence. A rusted carbide lamp from the 1922. A rotted rope that looked like it was from the 1800s. And bodies, mummified like Morrison, all reaching toward the center of whatever chamber they'd died in. Some wore clothes from decades past. Others looked like they'd been here for over a century. All dried to leather and bone, all with that same expression of desperate longing on their faces. People have been disappearing in these caves for a long time, I realized. The Cherokee stories, the pioneer reports, Efing, they were all true. Pete found something that made us both stop cold. Scratched into the stone wall in shaky handwriting. The hollow ones are waking, J. Morrison 1973. Below that, in different handwriting, they feed on life itself. S. Carter 1823. And below that, the darkness is hungry. M. Boone 1782. Daniel Boone's brother. I'd read about his disappearance in the historical records. He'd vanished in these caves almost 200 years ago. We need to leave. Now. Pete's voice cracked with fear. But that's when we heard them again, the graduate students calling for help. Their voices were closer now, just around the next bend. And mixed with their cries, I heard something else that made my heart stop. Sarah's voice, calling my name. "Rebecca, I'm here. I've been waiting for you." I knew it wasn't real, knew it was impossible. But hearing her voice again after 15 years of guilt and nightmares, part of me wanted to follow it, even if it led to death. Pete grabbed my arm. "That's not your friend. That's not anyone we know." He was right, but the voices kept calling, and now they sounded scared, desperate. What if the students were still alive? What if something was just playing tricks with our minds? We rounded the bend and found them. The two graduate students sat in a circular chamber, very much alive but wrong. Their skin was pale as cave fish, almost translucent. They'd lost weight, a lot of weight, but their eyes were huge and black in their gaunt faces. "Don't come closer," one of them whispered. "They're waking up, the hollow ones. They've been sleeping down here for so long, but we woke them up." "We tried to leave," the other student said, "but we can't. The light hurts now, and the surface world is too loud, too bright. We belong down here now." They looked at me with those huge black eyes, and I realized they weren't entirely human anymore. Something had changed them, transformed them into something that belonged in the deep dark. "Where's your professor?" I asked. "He fought them, tried to resist the feeding. That's why he looks like that." The first student pointed toward the chamber where we'd found Morrison's body. "We didn't fight. It's easier if you don't fight." Pete's radio crackled to life behind us. Static, then a voice calling, "Rebecca, Pete, can you hear me? I found the way out." It was Pete's voice, calling to us from the radio. But Pete was standing right beside me. I never made it back to the surface. The Pete next to me said quietly, "I got lost in the passages. They found me first." I spun around, headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. The thing that looked like Pete smiled at me with too many teeth. "They can look like anyone," one of the students explained. "Anyone who's died down here. They've been collecting faces for centuries." The fake Pete reached for me with fingers that were too long, too pale. I stumbled backward, falling hard on the stone floor. My headlamp went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. In the black, I heard movement. Lots of movement. Things that breathed without making sound, that moved without footsteps. And somewhere in the darkness, Sarah's voice calling, "Rebecca, why didn't you save me? Why did you let me die?" I found my backup light, a small LED flashlight. Its beam revealed pale figures emerging from cracks in the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Tall, thin, with black eyes and reaching hands. The hollow ones were awake, and they were hungry. The LED flashlight's beam sent them reeling back, but I could see it was only temporary. They hissed and covered their faces, but they didn't flee. They were waiting, patient as stone, for my light to fail. And it was failing. The battery meter dropped from full to half in seconds. "Light hurts them," I gasped, pulling emergency flares from my pack. "But it won't kill them." I cracked a flare, and red light exploded through the chamber. The hollow ones shrieked and pressed themselves against the walls, but their huge black eyes never left me. They were studying me, learning. The fake Pete melted away like fog, revealing something underneath that might have been human once, long ago. Its real voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Join us willingly, and the transformation is gentle. Fight us and die like Morrison." "What are you?" I demanded. One of the graduate students answered, his voice dreamy and distant. "They've been here since before humans walked the surface. Living in the deep caves, feeding on minerals and underground water. But something's changed. The surface world is poisoning their water, killing their food sources. They have to feed on life energy now, or they'll die." "Development," the other student added. "Strip mining, chemical runoff, industrial pollution, it's all seeping down into their world. We're killing them without even knowing they exist." The largest hollow one stepped forward, its pale skin glowing in the flare light. When it spoke, its voice was inside my head. "Asterisk, your kind destroys everything it touches. We take only what we need to survive." Asterisk. Images flooded my mind. Vast underground cities carved from living rock, generations of hollow ones living peacefully in the deep earth. Then the water turning bitter, the stone itself becoming toxic, their children dying, their elders withering away. "Asterisk, we are starving." "Asterisk," the voice continued. "Asterisk, life energy from your kind sustains us." A few surface dwellers so that thousands of us might live. Asterisk, you're talking about murder, I said. Asterisk, we speak of survival. As your kind does when it strips our mountains and poisons our water. Asterisk, the flare was burning down. Maybe 3 minutes of light left. In the red glow, I could see dozens of mummified bodies scattered around the chamber. Centuries of cavers and explorers who'd stumbled into this feeding ground. There has to be another way, I said. Asterisk, there is. Asterisk. The creature's mental voice was almost gentle. Asterisk, join us willingly. Let us transform you gradually. You will still be Rebecca Thornberry, but you will belong to the deep dark. You will help us select others who won't be missed. The homeless, the criminal, the forgotten. Asterisk. For a moment, I was tempted. The surface world was full of pain. 2. My divorce, my guilt over Sarah's death, the loneliness of my cabin in the woods. Down here, I could forget all that. Let the darkness wash it away. But then I thought about my duty. About the oath I'd taken to protect people in these caves. About all the innocent families whose loved ones would disappear if I helped these creatures. No, I said. The flare sputtered and died. In the darkness, they moved toward me like a tide of pale death. I cracked another flare, bought myself another 3 minutes. But I was running out of time and options. That's when I remembered the carbide lamp. Every caver carries one as backup. They burn acetylene gas, producing a flame hot enough to cut through metal. And if you dumped all the fuel at once, I unscrewed the fuel reservoir, pouring carbide pellets across the chamber floor. The hollow ones watched, confused, as I lit them with my dying flare. The explosion lit up the cave system like daylight. White-hot flame roared across the chamber, and the hollow ones screamed in genuine agony. The blast brought down part of the ceiling, sealing off their escape routes to the deeper caves. But it also opened a crack in the chamber wall, a crack that showed stars above. I climbed through falling rubble as floodwater rushed in behind me, sealing the chamber forever. The last thing I heard was the mental voice of their leader. Asterisk. This is not finished. There are other caves, other feeding grounds. We will survive. Asterisk. I emerged from an unknown cave entrance, 3 miles from where I'd gone in, just as the sunrise painted the mountains gold. The search team found me there, aged 10 years from partial life drain, babbling about pale creatures and underground cities. They said I'd been missing for 3 days. I thought it had been 3 hours. The official report said flash flooding caused the cave-in that killed Dr. Morrison and his team. Geological instability from heavy rains. Pete Garrison was listed as a drowning victim. His body never recovered. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital being treated for severe exhaustion and what the doctors called stress-related aging. They couldn't explain why I looked 10 years older than when I'd entered the cave, but they noted it in my file along with symptoms of possible psychological trauma. A team of government geologists arrived while I was recovering. They wore suits instead of cave gear and asked strange questions about geological anomalies and structural instabilities. They seemed very interested in Morrison's research notes, which had somehow survived the flooding. When I tried to tell them about the hollow ones, they nodded politely and made notes about hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation and isolation. Then they classified Morrison's entire research project and sealed the cave system with concrete. I was reassigned to surface duties only. Officially, it was for my own safety after the traumatic incident. Unofficially, they knew I'd never go underground again. But I could still feel them down there. The partial life drain had left me changed. Sometimes, late at night, I could sense other caves where similar things stirred in the darkness. I started tracking unusual disappearances, patterns of missing cavers and spelunkers across the country. I found newspaper clippings dating back to the 1800s. Always the same story. Experienced cavers vanishing without a trace, caves suddenly developing structural problems that required permanent closure, geological teams arriving to conduct routine surveys. The Cherokee weren't the only ones with stories about things living underground. Every culture that lived near cave systems had similar legends. The underground people, the hollow folk, the pale ones who stole humans and dragged them into eternal darkness. I became obsessed with stricter cave exploration regulations. Pushed for mandatory check-ins. better equipment requirements, closed access to unmapped systems. My colleagues thought I was paranoid, overly cautious because of my accident. They didn't understand that some caves weren't geological formations. They were prisons, holding cells designed to keep ancient things locked away from the surface world. And human activity, mining, drilling, chemical runoff, TPP, was weakening those locks. 3 months after the incident, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. Mammoth Cave System, just across the state line. A research team had gone missing while exploring new passages. Their last radio contact mentioned carved symbols and impossible acoustics. I drove down there that same day, but I was too late. The caves were already sealed, the official report already filed. Another geological instability. Another routine closure. But I met one of the local rangers at a diner near the cave entrance. He was shaking as he drank his coffee, kept looking over his shoulder like something was following him. "You ever hear voices down there?" he asked me. "Voices of people you know are dead?" I bought him another cup of coffee and told him about the importance of proper cave safety protocols. About never exploring unmapped passages alone. About the need to respect places that had been sealed off for good reasons. I didn't tell him about the hollow ones. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I gave him my card and told him to call if anything else unusual happened in his cave system. Because I was starting to understand that what happened in Kentucky wasn't isolated. It was part of something much larger, much older. The surface world was changing, poisoning the deep places where ancient things had slept for millennia. And those things were waking up hungry. So if you're thinking about exploring caves, especially the deep ones, the unmapped ones, listen to an old ranger's advice. Stay on the marked trails, never go alone. And if you hear voices calling from the darkness, voices that sound like people you've loved and lost, don't follow them. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some darkness is meant to stay hungry. And some warnings are written in blood for very good reasons. My name is James Riverwind, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years. That might not sound like much to some folks, but when you spend every day in the Monongahela National Forest, like I do, 15 years teaches you things. You learn the sounds the forest makes when it's healthy. You know which animals should be where and when. You can tell the difference between normal, quiet, and the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. The morning everything started, it was the wrong kind of quiet. I was doing my usual rounds through the cranberry glades, a boggy area deep in the forest where I track wildlife populations. November in West Virginia means most animals are getting ready for winter. Bears fattening up, deer moving to winter grounds, birds flying south. The bogs should have been full of life. Instead, I found nothing. Not just fewer animals than usual. I mean nothing. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no deer tracks in the mud. Even the insects were gone. In 15 years of walking these trails, I'd never seen anything like it. I stopped at the wooden boardwalk that crosses the main bog and pulled out my binoculars. The cranberry bushes spread out in front of me, red berries bright against the gray November sky. Everything looked normal, but it felt all wrong. Like when you walk into a house and know someone's been there, even though nothing's out of place. My radio crackled. "Base to Riverwind, how's the wildlife count looking today?" I pressed the button. "That's just it, Sarah. There's no wildlife to count. The whole area's empty." "Empty how?" "Empty, like every animal for miles around just packed up and left." Static filled the line for a moment. Then Sarah's voice came back, but it sounded strange, distant. "James, can you repeat that? I'm getting some interference." I tried the radio again, but all I got was static mixed with what sounded like voices speaking backwards. The hair on my arm stood up. Our radio system had never done that before. I clipped the radio back to my belt and kept walking. Maybe there was a good explanation. Maybe the Forest Service had done some work in the area I didn't know about. Maybe there was a gas leak or chemical spill that scared the animals away. But as I walked deeper into the bog area, the explanations got harder to find. I found a small clearing where deer liked to graze. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle, like something enormous had landed there. In the center of the circle, the ground was pressed down in a pattern I'd never seen before. two long impressions, side by side, each about 8 feet long and 2 feet wide. Like footprints, but no animal I knew had feet that big. I knelt down and touched the impressions. The mud was cold, colder than it should have been for November. And there was something else, a smell in the air, sharp and metallic, like the air right before lightning strikes. My compass started spinning. I pulled it out of my pocket and watched the needle turn in slow circles, never settling on any direction. The compass that had worked perfectly for 10 years was suddenly acting like we were sitting on top of a magnet. That's when I heard the wings. The sound came from above, heavy and rhythmic, like someone shaking out a huge canvas tarp. But when I looked up, the sky was empty. Gray clouds, no birds, nothing flying at all. The wing beats circled overhead for maybe 30 seconds, then faded into the distance. I've tracked animals my whole life. I know the sound wings make: eagles, hawks, geese, owls. This was different. Bigger. Much bigger. I started taking pictures of the impressions in the mud, but my camera kept malfunctioning. Every photo came out double exposed, showing not just the clearing but shadowy shapes that weren't there when I took the picture. Dark forms with what looked like enormous wings spread wide. By the time I hiked back to my truck, the sun was setting. The radio was still giving me nothing but static and those backwards voices. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal, which was weird because I usually got at least one bar in this area. I sat in the truck for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe the impressions were from a helicopter landing. Maybe the military was doing some kind of training exercise that was messing with electronics. But I knew animals. And animals don't flee from helicopters like this. They might get spooked and run, but they come back within a few hours. This felt different. This felt like every creature in the forest had sensed something so dangerous they'd rather risk starvation than stay in their territory. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Not because I thought someone was following me, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the trees. Something big enough to make impressions 8 feet long in solid mud. Something that flew without making a sound until it wanted you to hear it. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those wing beats circling overhead. My wife Martha asked me what was wrong over breakfast, but I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that an entire forest ecosystem has just vanished? Probably just seasonal migration patterns, I told her, spreading jam on my toast. Nothing to worry about. But I was worried. Worried enough that I called my supervisor before heading out and requested permission to do a full survey of the area. Worried enough that I packed extra equipment, a GPS unit, backup radio, and my grandfather's old Cherokee ceremonial knife, which I'd never carried in the field before. The knife was a family heirloom, passed down from my great-grandfather, who used to tell stories about the old days. Stories about creatures that lived between the world of men and the world of spirits. As a kid, I'd loved those stories. As an adult, I'd figured they were just tales meant to teach lessons. But today, having that knife on my belt made me feel better. I drove back to the cranberry glades before dawn, wanting to be there when the animals started their morning routines. If there were any animals left to have routines, the forest was still dead quiet. I hiked to the spot where I'd found the impressions yesterday. They were deeper now, as if whatever made them had pressed down harder during the night. And there were more of them, a whole trail leading from the clearing toward the heart of the bog. I followed the trail. The impressions led me through parts of the forest I rarely visited, dense areas where the trees grew so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight. The trail wound between massive oak trees and over fallen logs, always heading deeper into the wilderness. After about a mile, I found something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Feathers. Huge black feathers scattered around the base of an enormous oak tree. Each feather was over a foot long and wider than my hand, but they didn't look like any bird feathers I'd ever seen. They were too dark, almost metallic, and when I touched one, it felt wrong. Not like a feather at all, but like some kind of synthetic material. Above me, tree branches were broken off at about 20 feet up, snapped clean through like something massive had landed on them. I was taking pictures of the feathers when my radio suddenly came to life. Emergency broadcast. This is the Point Pleasant Emergency Management Office. We have reports of a structural failure on the Silver Bridge. Multiple vehicles in the water. All available rescue units respond immediately. I grabbed the radio. Base, this is Riverwind. Are you copying that emergency broadcast? Static. Then Sarah's voice, confused. What emergency broadcast, James? I'm not showing any alerts. The bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. Multiple vehicles in the water. James, there's been no bridge collapse. The Silver Bridge is fine. Are you feeling okay? I looked at my watch. The emergency broadcast had given the time as 5:17 p.m. My watch showed 9:23 a.m. The broadcast was coming from 8 hours in the future. I turned the radio off and sat down on a fallen log, trying to think. Radio signals could bounce off the atmosphere sometimes, picking up broadcasts from far away. But they couldn't pick up broadcasts from the future. Unless something was seriously wrong with the laws of physics in this part of the forest. I looked up at the broken branches above me and noticed something else. Scratches in the bark of the oak tree, deep gouges that formed a pattern. When I looked closer, I realized they were symbols. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings, Cherokee symbols. The same ones my grandfather had taught me when I was young. The symbols spelled out a single word. Warning. My hands started shaking. Nobody had spoken Cherokee in this area for over 100 years. And these symbols looked fresh, carved recently into the living wood. That's when I heard footsteps, not animal footsteps, human footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too heavy, and the rhythm was off, like someone learning to walk on legs that didn't quite fit. The footsteps were coming from deeper in the forest, moving toward me. I stood up and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a voice, deep and resonant, speaking in Cherokee. My grandfather had taught me enough of the language to understand the basic meaning. The bridge will fall, many will die. You must warn them. I spun around, looking for whoever was speaking, but the forest was empty. No one there but me, and the impossibly large feathers scattered at my feet. "Who are you?" I called out in English. "Where are you?" Silence. Then the wing beats started again, directly, overhead. This time they were slower, more deliberate, like something enormous circling and descending. I looked up and saw it, a shadow against the gray sky, but wrong. Too big to be any bird, shaped like a man but with wings that spread wider than the oak tree I was standing under. As it circled lower, I caught glimpses of details that my brain didn't want to process. Red eyes, glowing red eyes that seemed to look right through me. The creature, because there was no other word for it, landed on a branch 20 feet above my head. The branch groaned under its weight but didn't break. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then it spoke, not with its mouth but directly into my mind. "The bridge will fall at 5:17 p.m. 46 people will die. You can stop it." And then it was gone, launching itself into the sky with one powerful stroke of those massive wings. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that what I'd just seen wasn't real. But the broken branches were real. The feathers were real. The Cherokee symbols carved into the tree were real. And in about 8 hours, if the creature was right, a bridge full of people was going to collapse. I spent the rest of the morning trying to find rational explanations for what I'd experienced. Maybe I'd been exposed to some kind of hallucinogenic gas. Maybe stress from the job was finally getting to me. Maybe I'd hit my head and didn't remember. But the feathers were still there, and my radio kept picking up emergency broadcasts from the future. By noon, I'd convinced myself to drive to Point Pleasant. The Silver Bridge was a suspension bridge that connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio. Built in 1928, it carried thousands of cars across the Ohio River every day. When I got there around 1 p.m., everything looked normal. Traffic flowing both ways, people going about their business, no signs of any structural problems. I parked and walked onto the bridge, looking for anything that might indicate weakness or damage. The bridge swayed slightly in the wind, but that was normal for a suspension bridge. The cables looked solid. The roadway seemed stable, but standing there in the middle of the bridge, I felt something I'd never felt before. A certainty, deep in my bones, that this structure was going to fail. And soon, I walked back to my truck and tried calling the Point Pleasant Emergency Management Office. "This is James Riverwind with the Forest Service. I have reason to believe the Silver Bridge may be in danger of structural failure." "What kind of reason? How do you explain that a giant winged creature told you? I've been monitoring some unusual seismic activity in the area. There's a possibility of resonance effects on the bridge structure. It wasn't entirely a lie. Something was definitely causing unusual effects in the area. Sir, the bridge was inspected just last month. It's structurally sound. I understand that, but I really think you should consider temporarily closing it, just as a precaution. I'll pass your concerns along to the appropriate authorities. I knew what that meant. Nothing would happen. I drove back to the forest, but I couldn't concentrate on my work. Every few minutes, I'd check my watch. 2:30, 3:15, 4. At 4:30, I gave up and drove back to Point Pleasant. The late afternoon traffic was heavy, commuters heading home from work. I parked where I could see the bridge and watched car after car cross over the water. Normal people living normal lives with no idea what was coming. 5:10 p.m. I got out of my truck and started walking toward the bridge approach. Not sure what I was planning to do. Stop traffic? Start screaming about a giant bird monster that could see the future? Get myself arrested as a lunatic? 5:15 p.m. I was close enough to the bridge to see individual cars now. A school bus full of kids, a family in a station wagon, an elderly couple in a blue sedan, all of them heading across the bridge that was about to collapse. 5:16 p.m. I started running toward the bridge, shouting and waving my arms. A few drivers slowed down, probably thinking I was drunk or crazy. Most ignored me. 5:17 p.m. I was still 50 yards from the bridge when it happened. The sound came first, a deep groaning noise like metal under enormous stress. Then, the roadway started to buckle in the middle. I watched the suspension cables snap one by one, each failure sending a shock wave through the entire structure. The bridge folded in on itself like a closing book, dumping cars and trucks into the Ohio River 46 feet below. I stood there watching people die and knowing I could have prevented it if anyone had listened to me. The rescue operation went on all night. 37 bodies were recovered from the river. 9 people were never found. 46 people total, just like the creature had said. I gave a statement to the investigators, told them I'd been in the area on Forest Service business and witnessed the collapse. I didn't mention the radio broadcasts from the future or the winged creature with glowing red eyes. Who would have believed me? But as I drove home that night, I kept thinking about what the creature had said. You can stop it. I hadn't stopped it. I'd tried, but I'd failed. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the radio broadcasts got more frequent. Emergency calls from the future, always exactly 8 hours ahead. A house fire on Elm Street that would kill 3 people. A mine collapse that would trap 12 workers. A school bus accident on a winding mountain road. Each time, I tried to warn someone. Each time, no one believed me. And each time, the disasters happened exactly as predicted. I started making anonymous phone calls. There's a gas leak at 412 Elm Street. You should evacuate the building. The mine shaft on Harper's Ridge is unstable. Don't send anyone down there today. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes people took anonymous warnings seriously enough to be cautious. But not always. After 2 weeks of this, I was exhausted. I'd lost weight, wasn't sleeping, and Martha was asking more and more questions about why I was acting so strange. I knew I had to go back to the forest. Back to where it all started. I found the creature waiting for me in the same clearing where I'd first seen the impressions in the mud. It was perched on the oak tree with the Cherokee symbols. Those red eyes fixed on me as I approached. This time, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. Why me? I shouted up at it. Why are you doing this to me? The voice came into my head again, sad and tired. Because you can hear us. Because you have the blood of those who listen to the spirits. I can't save everyone. They won't listen to me. We know. We have tried many times, with many people. Most go insane from the knowledge, others simply refuse to accept it. So, why keep trying? The creature spread its wings, and I saw how tattered they were, how old and worn, because it is what we were made for. To see what comes and warn those who might prevent it. Even if we fail, we must try. We? I am the last. My people have watched over yours for thousands of years. We have seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the coming of wars and plagues and disasters. We have always tried to warn, Few have ever listened. I looked around the clearing, at the symbols carved into the trees, at the impressions in the mud that never seemed to fade. What happened to the others? The ones like me who could hear you? Some went mad. Some took their own lives rather than bear the burden of knowledge they could not use. A few learned to live with it, to save who they could, and accept that they could not save everyone. The creature's red eyes seemed to dim slightly. I am dying, James Riverwind. My kind does not live forever, and I have seen too much, tried to prevent too many tragedies. Soon there will be no one left to warn your people. What are you asking me to do? Take the gift. Learn to see what comes, as I do. Become the bridge between what is and what will be. I thought about the past 2 weeks. The sleepless nights, the failed warnings, the weight of knowing about disasters I couldn't prevent, the looks on people's faces when they thought I was crazy. And if I refuse? Then you go back to your normal life, and the warnings stop. People will die who might have been saved, but you will not have to carry the burden of their deaths. I stood there in the clearing for a long time, listening to the silence of the dead forest, thinking about the 46 people who died on the Silver Bridge, thinking about the ones I'd managed to save with anonymous phone calls. Finally, I looked up at the creature. If I do this, will you teach me? Help me figure out how to make people listen? I will teach you what I can in the time I have left. All right, I said. I'll do it. The creature's eyes flared brighter for a moment, and I felt something change inside my head, like a door opening onto a room I'd never known was there. Suddenly, I could see things that hadn't happened yet. The visions came all at once, flooding my mind like water through a broken dam. I saw hundreds of futures, thousands of possible disasters stretching out across time. The overwhelming flow of information brought me to my knees in the mud of the clearing. I saw myself in 6 months, warning a family about a gas leak that would have killed their children. I saw myself in 2 years, failing to prevent a tornado that would destroy half of a small town. I saw myself in 10 years, old before my time, hair gone white from the strain of created, carrying so much terrible knowledge. But I also saw the lives I would save. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The creature's voice echoed in my mind as the visions continued. You must learn to control the flow. See only what you can change when you can change it. Too much knowledge at once will destroy your mind. I concentrated, trying to push back against the flood of images. Slowly, the visions began to focus. Instead of seeing everything at once, I started to see specific events. A car accident on Route 9 tomorrow afternoon, a kitchen fire on Main Street next week, a mineshaft collapse in 3 days. Things I might actually be able to prevent. Better, the creature said. But you must be careful. Each vision you accept takes something from you. Your human life will be shorter for carrying this burden. I could feel it already, a heaviness in my bones, a tiredness that sleep wouldn't cure. But when I thought about the alternative, going back to my normal life while people died from disasters I could have prevented, the choice seemed easy. How do I make them listen? I asked. You learn, you experiment, you find the words that convince without revealing the source of your knowledge. It will take time. Over the next few weeks, the creature taught me how to filter the visions so they came one at a time instead of all at once. How to focus on events that were both serious enough to matter and small enough that people might actually take precautions. How to phrase warnings so they sounded like legitimate safety concerns instead of crazy predictions. The most important lesson was learning to live with failure. For every disaster I prevented, there would be 2 or 3 I couldn't stop, either because no one would listen, or because the warning came too late, or because changing one event just caused a different tragedy to happen instead. The guilt will eat you alive if you let it, the creature warned. You must remember, you are not responsible for the disasters. You are only responsible for trying to prevent them. I started to understand why the creature's kind was dying out. The burden was almost unbearable, even with the ability to save lives. Most people weren't strong enough to carry it for long. But I was determined to try. 3 months after that first encounter in the clearing, I developed a system. Anonymous tips to police and fire departments. Concerned citizen reports about potential safety hazards. Carefully worded warnings to people who seemed open to listening. I prevented a school bus accident by reporting dangerous road conditions that hadn't happened yet. I saved a family from carbon monoxide poisoning by calling in a suspected gas leak. I got a construction site shut down for safety violations one day before a crane would have collapsed and killed 2 workers. Not all of my attempts worked. I watched a house burn down because the fire department thought my anonymous tip was a prank. I couldn't convince a mine supervisor to delay a shift, and 3 men died when the tunnel collapsed exactly as I'd foreseen. But for every failure, there was at least one success, and that was enough to keep me going. The creature visited me less and less frequently as the months passed. Each time I saw it, it looked weaker, more transparent. The red glow in its eyes was fading. My time is almost over. It told me during what I sensed would be our last meeting. You have learned well. You will carry the gift forward. Will I ever see you again? When your time comes to pass the burden to another, I will be there to guide the transition. Until then, you walk this path alone. The creature spread its wings one last time and launched itself into the sky. I watched until it disappeared into the clouds. Then I was alone in the silent forest, but not really alone. The gift remained, bringing me visions of disasters yet to come and the chance to dispatch to prevent them. And along with the gift came the knowledge that I was part of something larger than myself. A chain of guardians stretching back thousands of years, all of them trying to protect humanity from the disasters they could see coming. I thought about my grandfather's stories, about the spirits that lived between worlds. Now I understood that those stories weren't just tales. They were history, the true history of people like me, who could see beyond the normal flow of time and tried to use that sight to save lives. That was 30 years ago. I'm retired from the Forest Service now, but I've never retired from the other job. The visions still come, though not as frequently as they did in the early days, and I've gotten better at making people listen. I run a small consulting business now, Riverwind Safety Solutions. Companies hire me to assess potential hazards in their operations. I make recommendations based on my years of experience in risk management. What they don't know is that my recommendations are based on visions of accidents that haven't happened yet. I've prevented industrial accidents, natural gas explosions, structural collapses. I've saved hundreds of lives over the years, maybe thousands. And except for my wife Martha, who figured out long ago that there was something unusual about my safety predictions, no one knows the real source of my knowledge. The cost has been exactly what the creature warned me about. I'm 71 years old, but I look and feel like I'm 90. My hair went white 20 years ago. My hands shake from the strain of carrying so much terrible knowledge. But I'm still here, still watching for disasters, still trying to save lives. And I'm not the only one anymore. 5 years ago, I found my replacement. A young woman named Sarah. The same Sarah who used to work radio dispatch for the Forest Service, as it turns out. She'd started having what she called bad feelings about certain places and situations. Feelings that turned out to be accurate, way too often to be coincidence. I've been training her. The way the creature trained me, teaching her to control the visions, to focus on disasters she can actually prevent, to live with the failures. She's stronger than I was at her age. She'll carry the burden longer, save more lives. The network is growing. We've found others, scattered across the country, all of them carrying some version of the gift. We share information now, coordinate our efforts. There's a former firefighter in California who can see wildfires before they start, a structural engineer in New York who dreams about building collapses, a meteorologist in Oklahoma who knows exactly where tornadoes will touch down. All of us are connected to something larger. Something that's been watching over humanity for thousands of years, even if most people never know it exists. Sometimes, late at night when the visions are particularly strong, I think I can see the creature again. Not physically, but in my mind. Still watching, still guiding, even though its physical form is long gone. And I understand now that death isn't really the end for guardians like us. We become part of the network, part of the eternal watching. The Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant eventually stopped, but that doesn't mean the guardians are gone. We're still here, still watching, still trying to warn people about the disasters we can see coming. Most of the time, you'll never know we're there. But if you ever get an anonymous phone call warning you about a gas leak, or a strange feeling that you shouldn't take that flight, or a nagging voice in your head telling you to take a different route to work. Listen to it. It might just save your life. And if you're one of the few who can see what's coming, the way I could, the way Sarah can, don't ignore it. Find others like yourself. Learn to use the gift responsibly. Accept the burden, even though it's heavy, because in the end, that's what we're here for. To stand watch between what is and what will be, and to save who we can along the way. The forest is never really silent. You just have to know how to listen. My name is William Greystone, and I've been a forest ranger for 20 years. I know these Virginia mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every ridge, every hidden valley where the old families used to live. What I'm about to tell you happened in September of 1958, and I still wake up some nights thinking about it. I was 48 then, with a wife named Helen and 3 kids who thought their daddy knew everything about the woods. Maybe I did know a lot, but there are some things in these mountains that go deeper than Park Service training can teach you. The Jefferson National Forest covers a lot of ground, but my beat was Iron Mountain, the high ridges where my own people came from. See, I'm what they call Melungeon, though we don't talk about it much. Mixed blood, African, Native American, maybe some Portuguese thrown in. My great-grandfather told stories about our people hiding up in these mountains when the world didn't want us anywhere else. Most folks think Melungeon is just an old word for mountain people, but it's more than that. We were the ones who didn't fit anywhere else, so we made our own place up where the air gets thin and the trees grow old. The government ran us off most of our land years back, but some of us stayed on as rangers or guides. Somebody had to watch over the old places. That September morning started normal enough. The leaves were just starting to turn, and there was that clean smell in the air that comes before the first frost. I was checking the old Cherokee trail markers when I got the radio call. Dispatch told me to meet some university people at the Iron Mountain Access Road. They had permits to dig around some of the old settlement sites. I didn't like it right away. Those sites weren't just empty land, they were graveyards, sacred places where my people laid their dead. But the papers were all official, signed by folks in Washington who never walked these ridges or knew what they meant. The team was led by Dr. Patricia Whitman, a thin woman with sharp eyes who talked like she was giving a lecture. She had 3 graduate students with her. Sarah Chen, who seemed nervous about everything, Mike Torres, who kept checking his equipment, and David Park, who wouldn't stop taking pictures. Mr. Greystone, Dr. Whitman said, shaking my hand with a grip that was all business. We're here to solve the Melungeon mystery once and for all. Your people have been a puzzle for too long. The way she said, your people made something cold settle in my stomach. But I had my job, and the permits were legal. These sites are pretty remote, I told them as we loaded their gear into my truck. And the local families don't much like strangers poking around their ancestors' resting places. Dr. Whitman waved that off. Superstition and scientific progress don't mix, Mr. Greystone. We're trying to understand these people's origins, not disturb anything unnecessarily. But as we drove up the mountain road, I noticed things that made me uneasy. The birds weren't singing like they should have been. Usually, September mornings are full of sound, crows calling, squirrels chattering, woodpeckers working the dead trees. Today, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. How much do you know about Melungeon history? Sarah asked me from the back seat. Enough, I said. My grandmother used to tell stories, said we were guardians of something important, but I never paid much attention. Thought it was just old woman talk. That's exactly what we're here to investigate, Dr. Whitman said. The stories, the isolation, the unusual genetic markers. There's something significant about this population that's been hidden by folklore and fear. We reached the first site around noon, a flat spot on the ridge where you could still see the foundations of old cabins, if you knew what to look for. There were graves here too, marked with stones that had names carved, so old you could barely read them. Some of those names were familiar. Goins, Mullins, Gibson. My own family names. The team started setting up their equipment right away, but I noticed Mike's metal detector kept giving false readings. Sarah's camera wouldn't focus properly, and David complained that his GPS unit was spinning like a compass near a magnet. Mountain interference, Doctor, Whitman said when I mentioned it. Iron ore deposits can affect electronic equipment. Maybe that was true, but I'd been up here with plenty of gear over the years and never had these kinds of problems. As the team started marking out a grid over what looked like the old cemetery, a wind picked up that hadn't been there before. The temperature dropped fast enough to see our breath, even though it was still early afternoon. Weather can change quick up here, I said, but I was already reaching for my radio to check the forecast. Clear skies all week, the dispatcher told me. No storms expected. That's when I saw my first sign that something was wrong, really wrong. There, standing at the edge of the clearing where the old forest began, was a man in clothes that looked like they came from 50 years ago. He was watching us with eyes that seemed too bright, and when I blinked to get a better look, he was gone. But I knew that face. I'd seen it in an old photograph my grandmother kept. It was my great-grandfather, Jacob Greystone, who'd been dead since before I was born. I didn't tell the team what I'd seen. How could I? But as they started digging into the first grave site, I felt like I was watching them break into my own family's house. The earth came up easy. Too easy for ground that should have been packed solid for decades. Sarah kept sneezing and rubbing her eyes like she was having an allergic reaction to something, and Mike's tools kept breaking on what should have been soft dirt. "This is unusual, Doctor," Whitman said, kneeling by the excavation. "The soil composition isn't what we expected. And look at this." She held up a piece of metal that gleamed like it was new, even though it had come from a grave that was supposed to be over 100 years old. It was shaped like a star with symbols carved around the edges, symbols I'd seen before in my grandmother's old books. "Pre-Columbian astronomical tool," she said, excitement making her voice higher. "This predates known Melungeon settlement by centuries. David, are you getting this?" But David was having trouble with his camera again. Every picture came out blurred, like something was moving too fast for the shutter to catch. And the temperature kept dropping. By 2 o'clock, we were all wearing our jackets. That's when we heard the first voice. It came from the woods around us, speaking words I couldn't understand but somehow felt in my bones. The language was old, older than English, older than Cherokee. It sounded like mourning and warning all mixed together. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, looking around with wide eyes. "Hear what?" Dr. Whitman was focused on cataloging artifacts. "The singing. Someone's singing out there." I heard it too, but Mike and David just looked confused. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the mountain itself was trying to tell us something. Then Sarah screamed. We all turned to see her backing away from the grave, pointing at something in the excavation. There, clear as day in the soft earth, was a handprint. A fresh handprint in dirt that had been undisturbed for generations. "Someone's playing tricks," Dr. Whitman said, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. "Local people trying to scare us off." I knew better. There was no way anyone could have gotten close enough to put that print there without us seeing them. And the hand that made it was too big, with fingers too long for any person I'd ever met. As we stared at the print, it began to change. The fingers spread wider, like whatever made it was trying to climb out of the ground. The earth around it started to shift and move, making a sound like breathing. "We should stop," I said. "Cover this back up and move to a different site." "Absolutely not, Doctor," Whitman snapped. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we came here to find. Unexplained phenomena connected to Melungeon sites." But Sarah was getting sicker by the minute. Her skin was breaking out in a rash, and she was breathing like she couldn't get enough air. Mike's hands were shaking so bad he couldn't hold his tools steady. "The air feels wrong," David said, lowering his camera. "Like it's too thick to breathe." That's when I saw them. More figures at the edge of the clearing, standing just inside the tree line where the shadows were deepest. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes, watching us with faces that were familiar but wrong. I recognized some of them from family photographs, from stories my grandmother told. But they'd all been dead for decades. They were trying to tell us something, gesturing toward the grave, their mouths moving in words I couldn't hear over the distance. But their expressions were clear enough. They wanted us to stop. They wanted us to leave. "Dr. Whitman," I said carefully, "maybe we should call it a day. Come back tomorrow with different equipment." She looked up from the artifacts with eyes that were a little too bright, a little too excited. "Are you kidding? We're on the verge of a major discovery here. These items could rewrite the history of pre-Columbian North America." As she spoke, the handprint in the grave grew larger. Now, it looked like someone was pushing up from underneath, trying to break through. The earth cracked and shifted, and a smell rose from the opening that made my stomach turn. It was the smell of old graves and older secrets. Sarah collapsed. She just fell over, her body shaking like she was having a seizure. Her skin had turned pale as winter, and when I checked her pulse, it was racing like a bird's heart. "We need to get her to a hospital," I said, but when I tried to lift her, something grabbed my wrist. It was cold as ice and strong as a bear trap. I looked down and saw fingers made of mist and memory wrapped around my arm. They belonged to a woman in a faded dress, a woman who looked exactly like my great-grandmother in the old family pictures. She spoke to me in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "Stop them, William. Stop them before they wake what should stay sleeping." Then she was gone, and I was holding Sarah's limp body while Mike and David stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What just happened?" Mike asked. "You were talking to someone, but there's nobody there." Dr. Whitman was still digging, pulling more artifacts from the grave. Star charts carved in stone, metal tools that shouldn't have existed in pre-industrial America, and at the bottom of the excavation, something that made all of us step back in shock. It was a body, perfectly preserved, lying in clothes that were old but looked like they'd been buried yesterday. The face was peaceful, eyes closed like he was just sleeping. But I knew that face as well as I knew my own. It was me, or someone who looked exactly like me, down to the scar on my chin from a childhood fall. "Incredible preservation, Doctor," Whitman whispered. "The soil conditions here must be perfect for mummification." But I knew it wasn't the soil. As I stared at my own face, looking back at me from that grave, the body's eyes opened. They were my eyes, but older, sadder, like they'd seen things that would break a normal person's mind. The corpse smiled at me and spoke in my own voice. "Welcome home, William. We've been waiting for you." After that, everything went wrong fast. Sarah came around, but she wasn't right. She kept speaking in languages none of us recognized, and when she looked at you, it was like someone else was looking out through her eyes. Someone old and angry. Dr. Whitman wouldn't listen to reason. The more strange things happened, the more excited she got. She called it unprecedented supernatural activity associated with indigenous burial sites, and started making plans to bring in more equipment, more people. "You don't understand," I told her as we set up camp for the night. "These aren't just burial sites, they're protected places, sacred ground. And we're not welcome here." "Superstition," she said, but she kept looking over her shoulder like she expected something to come out of the trees. "We should have left. God help me, we should have packed up right then and driven back down the mountain." But Mike had found something in the second grave that changed everything. It was a chamber, carved out of solid rock and sealed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The air that came out when we broke the seal was cold as winter and smelled like centuries of secrets. And inside, perfectly preserved, were books. Not just any books. These were bound in leather that was soft as new, filled with writing in a dozen different languages. Star charts that showed constellations I'd never seen, mathematical formulas that made my head spin, medical knowledge that was supposed to be impossible for mountain people to have. "My God, Doctor," Whitman breathed, holding one of the books like it was made of gold. "This is advanced astronomical knowledge, pre-Columbian mathematics. These people weren't primitive at all." But as she spoke, the temperature around us dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Our breath started fogging, and frost began forming on the equipment, even though it was still September. That's when I realized what was happening. We'd found the knowledge my grandmother used to talk about, the secrets the Melungeon people were supposed to guard, and something was very, very angry that we'd disturbed it. The figures at the Bildad Guard, the edge of the clearing, were multiplying. What had been 3 or 4 shadowy forms were now dozens, standing in a circle around our camp. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They wanted us to see them, to understand that we were surrounded. "They're not real," Mike kept saying, but his voice was shaking. "They're just hallucinations from whatever's in the air here." Then David screamed. He'd been taking pictures of the books when something reached out of the open chamber and grabbed his camera. But it wasn't a hand that took it. It was a vine made of shadow and starlight that wrapped around the camera and pulled it into the darkness. David tried to follow his equipment, leaning into the chamber to grab it back. That's when we heard the voice from inside, a voice that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "Who disturbs the Guardian's rest? Who breaks the seals of the Watchers?" David jerked back like he'd been burned, but something had hold of him. Invisible hands dragged him toward the chamber opening, while he clawed at the ground and screamed for help. I grabbed his legs and pulled, and for a moment we played tug-of-war with forces I couldn't see. Then whatever had him let go suddenly, and David came flying back so hard we both tumbled across the camp. When I looked at his face, I saw terror like nothing I'd ever seen before. His hair had gone white at the temples, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "They showed me," he whispered. "They showed me what this place really is. What the Melungeon people were really guarding." "What did you see?" I asked, but he just shook his head. "Knowledge," he said. "Knowledge that could destroy the world if the wrong people found it, and we just handed it to them." Dr. Whitman was still examining the books, but now she was reading from them. The words that came out of her mouth weren't English or any language I'd ever heard. They were sounds that made the air shimmer and the ground beneath us vibrate like a tuning fork. With each word she spoke, the circle of figures around us grew tighter. I could see their faces now, men and women from every generation of Melungeon families, all watching us with expressions of growing anger. "Stop reading," I told her. "You don't know what those words do." But she couldn't hear me anymore. The book had hold of her attention like a fish on a hook, and she was reading faster and faster, her voice getting higher and more desperate. That's when my great-grandfather stepped out of the circle. He looked exactly like he had in life, except his eyes were black as the space between stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. "William Greystone," he said, "blood of my blood. You have brought desecrators to the sacred places. You have allowed them to break the seals your people died to protect." "I didn't know," I said. "I was just doing my job." "Your job," he said, and his voice was full of sadness, "is to guard what must not be released. Your job is to protect the knowledge that could unmake the world. And you have failed." Around us, the other spirits began to speak, not in words, but in memories that filled my head like water filling a broken dam. I saw the truth of what the Melungeon people really were. We weren't just mixed-race mountain folk hiding from persecution. We were the guardians, chosen to protect knowledge that came from before the world was young. Star maps that showed the way to other worlds, mathematical formulas that could bend space and time, medical knowledge that could extend life far beyond its natural span, and we were chosen to guard it because we were the ones nobody else would listen to. The people society had forgotten, pushed to the margins, dismissed as ignorant mountain folk. Who would believe that we held the keys to secrets that could remake reality? But now Dr. Whitman had those secrets, and she was reading them aloud, without understanding what they meant. The words were having an effect. Noted the air around us was beginning to tear like fabric, showing glimpses of other places, other times. "You have to choose," my great-grandfather said. "Stop her, or watch everything you love burn." Sarah had stopped speaking in tongues and was staring at me with eyes that were her own again, but filled with terror. "William," she whispered, "I can see them. I can see what's coming through. We have to stop her before she finishes the incantation." But Dr. Whitman was protected by something now. When I tried to take the book from her hands, invisible forces threw me back so hard I hit a tree 20 feet away. Mike and David tried to help, but they couldn't get within 10 feet of her before the same force knocked them down. The only one who could reach her was Sarah. But when she tried to grab the book, Dr. Whitman's head turned toward her with a sound like breaking bones. The face that looked at Sarah wasn't Dr. Whitman's anymore. It was something else, something old and hungry that had been waiting for centuries to be set free. "Too late," it said in Dr. Whitman's voice. "The door is opening, the guardians have failed, and we are coming home." The world started coming apart at the seams. Where Dr. Whitman stood reading from that book, reality was cracking like old paint. Through the cracks, I could see other places. Cities that burned under alien stars, forests where the trees had faces and the faces were screaming, oceans that boiled with things that should never have been born. And through those cracks, things were starting to come through. They were small at first, wisps of shadow that moved like smoke but felt like ice when they touched you. But they were growing stronger with every word Dr. Whitman spoke, feeding on the knowledge she was releasing into the world. "We have to stop her," I shouted over the wind that was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "How?" Mike yelled back. We can't even get close to her. That's when my great-grandfather appeared beside me, solid as life for the first time since this nightmare began. "There is a way," he said, pressing something cold into my hand. "But it will cost you everything you think you know about yourself." I looked down and saw he'd given me a knife, not modern steel, but something older, carved from bone and metal that seemed to drink in the light around it. The handle was warm in my palm, and I could feel power flowing through it like electricity. "What is it?" I asked. "The Guardian's blade," he said. "Forged from the bones of the first Watchers, blessed with the blood of every generation of protectors. It can cut through the veils between worlds, but only in the hands of a true Guardian." "I'm not a Guardian," I said. "I'm just a forest ranger who got in over his head." "You are Jacob Greystone's great-grandson," he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You are the blood of the Watchers, whether you claim it or not. The choice is simple: accept what you are and save the world, or remain what you think you are and watch it burn." Around us, the spirits of every Melungeon who had ever died protecting these secrets were forming a circle. They weren't threatening anymore, they were pleading. Through their combined voices, I heard the truth that my grandmother had tried to tell me years ago. We weren't refugees hiding in the mountains, we were volunteers. When the knowledge came to Earth, whether from fallen stars or older civilizations or places beyond human understanding, someone had to guard it. Someone had to make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. The Melungeon people had taken that burden willingly, accepting exile and persecution in exchange for the responsibility of keeping humanity safe from knowledge it wasn't ready for. And now that knowledge was getting out. "The incantation is almost complete," my great-grandfather said urgently. "Soon the barriers will be down permanently, and nothing will be able to stop what comes through. You have to choose now, William." I looked at Dr. Whitman, floating 3 feet off the ground in a whirlwind of torn reality and escaping nightmares. I looked at Sarah, Mike, and David, huddled together and staring at horrors that were seeping into our world. I thought about my wife Helen and my kids, sleeping safely in our house 50 miles away, not knowing that their world was about to change forever. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I took the knife and felt it come alive in my hand. Knowledge flooded my mind, not just facts, but understanding. I could see the lines of force that held reality together, could feel the places where the knowledge was trying to break free, and I could see what I had to do. "I'm sorry," I said to Dr. Whitman, though I knew she couldn't hear me anymore. The blade went through her heart like she was made of mist, but it wasn't her body I was cutting. It was the connection between her and the book, the link that was allowing the ancient knowledge to use her as a conduit. She dropped like a puppet with cut strings, and the book fell from her hands to land in the dirt at her feet. But the damage was already done. Reality was still cracked, and things were still trying to come through. "Close the door," my great-grandfather said. "Speak the words of binding." But I didn't know the words. I was just a forest ranger who'd found out 5 minutes ago that his family had been guarding cosmic secrets for generations. That's when Sarah stepped forward. The thing that had been speaking through her earlier hadn't been a malevolent spirit. It had been my great-grandmother, trying to prepare Sarah to help when the time came. "I know the words," she said, her voice steady despite everything we'd been through. She taught them to me while she was using my reef voice. But I can't speak them alone. It takes blood of the Guardians to make them work. Together, she and I began to recite words in a language that was older than human civilization. As we spoke, the cracks in reality began to close. The things that had been trying to come through were pulled back to wherever they belonged. The temperature returned to normal, and the unnatural wind died down. But Dr. Whitman wasn't breathing. The knowledge had hold of her too strongly, my great-grandfather explained, as I knelt beside her still form. "When you cut the connection, it took part of her with it. She'll live, but she'll never remember what happened here." Mike and David were sitting in the dirt, staring at us like they'd seen us grow extra heads. The memory of what they'd witnessed was already fading from their minds, not because of any magic, but because human brains have a way of protecting themselves from truths too big to handle. "What do we tell people?" David asked, his voice small and lost. "That Dr. Whitman had an accident," I said. "That the dig was unsuccessful and the sites should be left alone." "But the artifacts," Mike said, looking around. "All those books and tools." I looked where he was pointing, but there was nothing there except disturbed earth and broken camping equipment. The chamber had sealed itself, the books had crumbled to dust, and the artifacts had returned to whatever state they'd been in before we'd disturbed them. The mountain had taken back its secrets, and the guardians had reclaimed their watch. As we loaded Dr. Whitman's unconscious form into my truck and prepared to leave, my great-grandfather appeared beside me one last time. "It's not over," he said. "This was just one breach. One moment when the barriers were thin. There will be others, and when they come, the guardians must be ready." "What if I don't want to be a guardian?" I asked. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the grandfather I'd never gotten to know in life. "Too late for that, William. You picked up the blade. You spoke the words. Whether you want it or not, you're one of us now." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll always know when the knowledge is stirring," he said. "It means you'll always be watching for signs that someone is getting too close to things they shouldn't touch. It means you'll spend the rest of your life protecting a world that will never know how close it came to ending. And my family? Will be protected," he promised. "The guardians look after their own, but William, teach your children, prepare them, because one day they'll have to make the same choice you made today." With that, he faded away, leaving me alone with 3 traumatized graduate students and a woman who'd nearly ended the world in the name of scientific progress. That was 67 years ago, and I'm still a guardian. Dr. Whitman recovered, but she never remembered what happened on Iron Mountain. The official report listed it as a case of severe altitude sickness and equipment failure. The archaeological project was canceled, and the sites were designated as protected cultural areas that could only be accessed with special permits that I made sure were never issued. Mike, David, and Sarah finished their degrees and went on to other careers. They remembered the expedition as a disaster but couldn't quite recall why. Sometimes I'd get Christmas cards from them, and they'd mention having strange dreams about mountains and shadows, but nothing more than that. The government did take an interest in my report, though they didn't believe the supernatural parts. What caught their attention was my recommendation that certain cultural sites be monitored for unusual geological activity, and that rangers with appropriate ethnic backgrounds be assigned to watch over them. It turned out I wasn't the only guardian working within the Park Service. There were others. Cherokee Rangers watching over sites in the Smokies, Pueblo descendants keeping an eye on ruins in the Southwest, Ojibwe guides monitoring sacred lakes in Minnesota. We found each other gradually, carefully, recognizing the signs that someone else knew about the thin places where old knowledge liked to surface. I raised my children with the stories my grandmother had tried to tell me, not as fantasy or folklore, but as history and responsibility. My daughter Mary became a park ranger herself, and my son Thomas went into archaeology, but the right kind, the kind that knows when to stop digging. The blade my great-grandfather gave me never left my side after that day. I wore it under my ranger uniform, hidden but always ready. Over the years, I had to use it 3 more times. Once, when a mining company got too interested in the mineral deposits around a Cherokee sacred site. Once when a military research team tried to investigate magnetic anomalies near an old Seminole settlement. And once when a group of thrill seekers with metal detectors got too close to finding something that should have stayed lost. Each time, I was able to stop the breach before it became critical. But each time, I could feel that the barriers were getting thinner. The knowledge was getting more restless. Whatever cosmic forces had brought those secrets to Earth in the first place were still out there, still pushing to reclaim what they'd lost. Helen never asked about the strange phone calls I'd get in the middle of the night, or why I sometimes had to leave for emergency Park Service business that I couldn't explain. But she knew something had changed in me after that September expedition. I was more watchful, more protective of our family, more careful about the stories I told and the places I took them. When I retired from the Park Service in 1985, I didn't really retire. The guardians don't get to stop being guardians. I just traded my official uniform for civilian clothes and kept doing the same job I'd been doing for 30 years. Now I'm 95 years old, and my grandson, William, named after me, is learning to hear the voices in the wind. He doesn't know it yet, but he's got the sight. Last month, he asked me why the old cemetery up on Iron Mountain always feels so cold, even in summer. I told him the same thing my great-grandfather told me. Some places are special, and special places need special people to watch over them. He's not ready for the whole truth yet, but he will be, soon enough. The knowledge is stirring again. I can feel it in my bones, hear it in the way the wind moves through the trees. Something is coming, something that will test the barriers we've spent generations maintaining. When that day comes, young William will have to make the same choice I made in 1958. I just hope I've taught him well enough that he'll make the right one. Because the thing about being a guardian is this: the world depends on you, but it never knows you exist. You protect people who would think you're crazy if you told them what you protect them from. You keep secrets that could revolutionize human understanding, but you keep them because revolution isn't always a good thing, and you do it because someone has to. Because knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and humanity isn't wise enough yet to handle what the guardians keep locked away. Maybe someday we will be. Maybe someday the barriers can come down, and the secrets can be shared safely. But until that day comes, there will always be guardians watching from the shadows, keeping the doors closed and the lights burning. The mountains remember everything, even when people forget. And in the mountains, the guardians are always listening. Asterisk. End of narrative. 4,547 words. Asterisk.